Oh, that Nestle's Quick Bunny just cracks me up. You didn't see the commercial, but anyway. All right, back. Smoking Cigars with Howlinblind, Money Slim, JFK versus the Federal Reserve Bank. This is part 2. Now, and I really, really hope you listen to part 1, because it's the build up to part 2, and then part 3 is going to, part 2 is going to be like the precursor. Part 2 is going to be the meat, and then part 4, if there's a part 4, will be the closer. Okay. My thing is, as you all well know, if you watched any of my videos, you know that I do not like the Federal Reserve Bank. And I became aware of the fact that the Federal Reserve Bank is not a government agency. It just bears the name federal, like Federal Express. You've heard Dennis Kucinich say that. Well, I first heard it in the movie America, Freedom to Fascism, a documentary produced and made by Aaron Russo, the late great Aaron Russo. What a wonderful man. Now, the Federal Reserve, as we know, is a private bank. It's a private bank owned by a bunch of little banks. And they're actually owned by just a very few elite billionaires at the top of the food chain. Here's what happens. America used to print its own money at no interest, and the country prospered. And I'm at the very last video, I'll put a bunch of links in the where you can find this stuff. Or you email me, send me a message. I'll send you all the links that I've got to back up all this I say. Because I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want you to look it up. Okay. The Federal Reserve Bank is a bank owned by private bankers. It's not a government bank. The government used to have the Treasury print up money. Congress had the right, according to the Constitution, to print and coin money, regulate its value. And that's what we used to do. There have been banks that popped up from time to time and knocked back down. The last one was knocked down by Mr. Andrew Jackson when he was president. And he got rid of the Federal, it wasn't called the Federal Reserve Bank, but it was basically the same thing. It was a privately owned bank. Government would print up bonds at no interest, meaning a $5,000 bond was worth $5,000. You may say, Howlinblind, Muddy Slim, if the government prints up a $5,000 bond, isn't it worth $5,000? The answer is no. Ask me why. Thank you, I appreciate that. The reason it's not worth $5,000 is because when we trade that $5,000 bond to the Federal Reserve Bank for $5,000, those $5,000 come to us through the government with interest attached. And so you can look at it two ways. We only get to spend out of that $5,000, let's say $4,500. Or you could say we owe back $5,500. You can look at it both, two ways. You could say, well, we borrow $5,000 from the Federal Reserve Bank. We have to give them $5,500 back. So where are we going to get the extra $500? Or you can say we only get to spend $4,500 of that money because we got to save $500 to pay back on the interest. Where does the money come back to pay the Federal Reserve? It comes out of your pockets and my pockets, folks, in the form of income tax. That's where that money goes. That money pays the monthly bill to the Federal Reserve for our government's wonderful spending spree. Let me check my time real quick because I want to hurry up and get into the meat on this. Yeah, we're fine. We're fine. John F. Kennedy knew that this was a bad thing. He knew that it was bad and the country needed to prosper, and the only way the country could prosper, it would be through debt-free money. So I'm going to do some reading from a website, and I will give the links. I remember seeing some silver certificates back in those days, and I can't remember if they were silver certificates from the 30s or the 60s. But here's what happened. On June 4th of 1963, a virtually unknown presidential decree, Executive Order 11110, was signed with the authority to basically strip the Federal Reserve Bank of its power to loan money to the United States federal government at interest. With the stroke of a pen, President John F. Kennedy declared that the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank would soon be out of business. When President John Kennedy, the author of, it talks about something else. Anyway, by doing this, he wanted to issue silver certificates against silver bullion or standard silver dollars in the Treasury. At that time, the Treasury held silver. This means that for every ounce of silver in the U.S. Treasury vault, the government could introduce new money into circulation based on the silver bullion physically held there. As a result, more than $4 billion in United States notes were brought into circulation in $2, $5, $10, and $20 denominations. United States notes were never circulated but were being printed at the Treasury when Kennedy was assassinated. It appears obvious that President Kennedy knew the Federal Reserve Federal Reserve notes being used as the purported legal currency were contrary to the Constitution of the United States of America. You know, you'll have to read it for yourself to get the full gist of it, because when you read this, you're going to want to read it about 8 times. Then it shows some pictures. I've seen other sites where they say that some of the money actually got into circulation. And as soon as Kennedy was assassinated, I've heard this, I don't know how many times, that one of the very first things that happened when Lyndon Johnson was inaugurated, the first thing he did was he got on the phone to the United States Treasury and said, stop printing those notes. Let's let that sink in a little bit. Who was the last president who was killed because he was printing money at no interest? I think his name was Abraham Lincoln. Look it up, folks. I'm going to give you the links. I want you to do your research. I want you to get the word out. And you decide whether you want to be prosperous or stay in debt. Okay, let's see where I'm at. We're at 8 minutes. I got a couple more minutes. Now, yes, it might never happen. We might never shut down the Federal Reserve. You know, and Ron Paul in the Congress is pushing for a bill to audit the Federal Reserve. You know, a Federal Reserve has never been audited. We don't know where all that money goes. We're the ones paying it back, folks. Do you understand that? We're the one having to pay back the $700 billion bailout that George Bush gave to the big bankers and AIG, and we're the ones paying back the additional $8 billion that Barack Obama borrowed from the Federal Reserve to bail out these financial institutions. Ask yourself, where does this money come from? We're in a financial crisis right now. The money is tight. How come all that money that was in circulation before isn't out there being circulated? It's not some rich fat cat hoarding it up at home and putting it in a safe. You know, guys with lots of money, let's say you got a guy that's got $10 trillion sitting in the bank. He's not going to sit at home and say, no, honey, we better, times are tight. We better slow down on our spending. No, they're still going to go out and buy their fancy cars. So the money is being held back. And in part 3, I'm going to tell you who's holding it back and why they're holding it back. All right, let's take a short break. Smoking Cigars with Howlinblind, John F. Kennedy versus the Federal Reserve. Be right back.